The wind howled across the barren, frozen wasteland, carrying with it a biting chill that pierced through even the thickest layers of thermal clothing. Dr. Alec Warren tightened his scarf around his neck, his breath forming small clouds that dissipated into the cold air. He stood at the edge of a makeshift camp, staring at the dark maw of a massive drilling site where a steel drill bit had been relentlessly churning through the Antarctic ice for weeks. "We're close," he muttered to himself, though no one was close enough to hear. His words were carried away by the wind, lost in the vast, empty expanse of white. Dr. Warren had always been driven by a hunger for discovery. That drive had brought him to the most inhospitable place on Earth, to the ice fields of Antarctica, where the only signs of life were the occasional snowstorm and the endless, oppressive sky. But there was something else here, something buried beneath kilometers of ancient ice, something that had defied explanation. When the first faint signals of an anomaly had been picked up by a satellite sweep 6 months ago, he had been the first to demand an expedition to investigate. Now, after months of preparation and anticipation, they were finally on the brink of uncovering whatever lay hidden in the ice. "Dr. Warren," a voice crackled through his radio, "you should come to the control tent. We've got something interesting." His pulse quickened. Dr. Warren turned away from the drilling site and trudged through the snow toward the control tent, a dull orange glow emanating from within. As he entered, he was greeted by the hum of machinery and the buzz of frantic activity. Monitors displayed feeds from the drill's sensors, showing data streams and seismic readouts. The team members glanced at him, a mix of excitement and unease reflected in their eyes. "What is it?" he asked, moving closer to the main console where Ingrid, the lead geologist, was hunched over, her brow furrowed in concentration. Ingrid didn't look up at first. She was replaying a seismic scan on the screen, the data forming a three-dimensional map of the subsurface. It showed layers of ice, dense and solid, but beneath them, something different. An intricate geometric pattern that should not have been there, something rigid and angular that nature had no business creating. "We hit a structure," Ingrid said, finally turning to face him. "About 1 kilometer down. It's massive." Dr. Warren's eyes widened. "A structure, as in artificial?" Ingrid nodded, her lips a thin line. "Whatever it is, it's not natural. We've run multiple scans. It's symmetrical, almost like a complex. If I didn't know any better, I'd say it looks like some kind of facility." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications of what she was saying. An ancient, underground facility buried deep beneath the Antarctic ice, hidden for God knows how long. Dr. Warren's mind raced, trying to grasp the enormity of the discovery. He'd come here expecting to find a meteorite, maybe the remnants of some long-buried geological phenomenon, but this was beyond anything he could have imagined. "We need to get down there," he said, his voice barely containing his excitement. "Prepare the team for an exploratory descent. I want eyes on whatever this is by the end of the day." Ingrid hesitated. "We should be careful. We still don't know what we're dealing with." "I understand your concern, but this is the opportunity of a lifetime," Dr. Warren said. "We didn't come all this way to stop now." She nodded, though her expression remained wary. The rest of the team began preparing for the descent, checking equipment and readying their gear. Dr. Warren stepped outside, his gaze fixed on the darkening sky. Snowflakes drifted lazily down, obscuring the view of the distant horizon. Somewhere beneath them lay a a secret that had been buried for millennia, and now it was on the verge of being exposed. The elevator platform descended slowly, creaking as it lowered Dr. Warren and 3 other team members into the abyss. Powerful lights mounted on the platform illuminated the walls of ice around them, revealing striations and cracks like veins beneath translucent skin. The further they descended, the more the ice seemed to change, darkening and becoming almost glass-like, as if preserving something beneath its surface. Dr. Warren kept his eyes forward, watching the ground approach as the platform descended the final few meters. When they finally reached the bottom, they were greeted by a yawning cavern, the walls of which glistened with ice. But what caught their attention was the massive metal door embedded in the far wall, half covered in a thick layer of frost. It was enormous, towering over them, with strange alien symbols etched into its surface. The metal was black and smooth, polished to a mirror-like sheen that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. Dr. Warren stepped forward, feeling a chill run down his spine. The symbols were unlike any language he had ever seen, intricate and looping, forming patterns that seemed to shift and twist when viewed from different angles. "Is that writing?" one of the team members asked, his voice echoing in the cavern. "It has to be," Dr. Warren replied, but even as he said it, he felt a creeping unease. There was something about the symbols that made his skin crawl, as if they were not meant to be seen, as if their presence alone was a violation of reality. They began to clear the ice away from the door, revealing more of the alien script. It took hours of careful work, but eventually they found what appeared to be a control panel to the side of the door. Dr. Warren hesitated, his hand hovering over the panel, before finally pressing what looked like an activation switch. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deep, resonant groan, the door began to slide open, revealing a dark corridor that stretched into the depths of the earth. The air that wafted out was stale and heavy, carrying with it a faint metallic odor. It was a scent that reminded Dr. Warren of old, forgotten places, abandoned mines, or the basements of ancient, crumbling buildings. But there was something else, too, something he couldn't quite place. A smell that lingered at the edge of memory, like the scent of ozone after a lightning storm. "Let's go," Dr. Warren said, grabbing his flashlight and stepping forward. The others hesitated, but eventually followed, their footsteps echoing through the darkness. The corridor walls were smooth, made of the same dark metal as the door, but as they moved further in, they began to see more of the alien symbols carved into the walls. Dr. Warren could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. They were walking into a place that had been hidden for longer than human history, a place that no one was meant to see. Every step they took seemed to carry them deeper into something vast and incomprehensible, a place that defied logic and reason. Then they reached a large open chamber. At its center stood a colossal, circular device, surrounded by consoles covered in alien writing. The device pulsed faintly, emitting a low hum that reverberated through the room, filling the silence with a sense of anticipation. "Do you hear that?" one of the team members whispered. Dr. Warren nodded. He could hear it, a faint, rhythmic beating, like a heartbeat echoing through the metal walls. It was as if the base itself was alive, waiting for something, or someone. He felt a sudden, inexplicable urge to reach out and touch the console, to understand, to know what this place was and why it had been hidden for so long. But as he raised his hand, the lights flickered and the hum grew louder. For a moment, he thought he saw something move in the shadows, something impossibly large, slithering just out of sight. He pulled his hand back, his breath hitching in his throat. The chamber felt like a giant breathing lung, as if it were inhaling and exhaling, drawing them deeper into its suffocating embrace. "We should head back," one of the team members said, his voice trembling. "We need to report this. Bring in more equipment." But Dr. Warren shook his head. "Number. We're here now and we've found it. We have to keep going." As he stepped closer to the pulsing device, he felt a cold wave wash over him, and for a brief moment he heard a whisper, soft and incomprehensible, as if spoken from the depths of a dream. It was then that he knew, with absolute certainty, that they had awakened something, and whatever it was, it had been waiting for them. The days that followed their initial discovery blurred into one continuous, fevered cycle of exploration and dread. Dr. Warren's team had set up a base camp inside the alien facility, their equipment spread across the cold metallic floor of the central chamber. Cables snaked out of portable generators, casting a pale, flickering light over the strange, intricate carvings that decorated the walls. The air was thick with an oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional hiss of static from the radio or the low hum that seemed to emanate from the depths of the facility itself, like a distant, echoing heartbeat. Ingrid sat at one of the makeshift workstations, her eyes glued to a series of monitors displaying the scans they had managed to compile. They showed a labyrinthine network of tunnels and chambers stretching out for miles beneath the ice, a vast and intricate complex that seemed to go on forever. It made no sense, the sheer scale of it, and yet there it was, an ancient, sprawling facility buried beneath the Antarctic ice, untouched for eons. "I don't like this, Alec," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The more we uncover, the more I feel like we're disturbing something we shouldn't." Dr. Warren didn't respond. He stood in front of the alien device at the center of the chamber, his gaze fixed on the pulsating light that flickered beneath its smooth, dark surface. It was a rhythm, a constant, steady pulse, and he couldn't shake the feeling that it was somehow alive. The thought made his skin crawl, but at the same time he felt drawn to it, as if it were calling to him, whispering secrets that only he could hear. "We're on the verge of the greatest discovery in human history," he said finally, turning to face her. "We have to understand this place, Ingrid. Whatever this is, it's been here longer than anything we've ever known. It could change everything." She opened her mouth to protest, but before she could, a sudden sharp noise echoed through the chamber, a loud metallic clang that reverberated off the walls. Everyone froze, their eyes darting toward the darkened corridor from which the sound had come. For a moment there was only silence, and then, faintly, they heard it. A soft, rhythmic tapping, like footsteps echoing in the distance, growing louder, closer. "Is someone down there?" one of the team members, a young technician named Harris, asked, his voice quavering. Dr. Warren felt a cold sweat break out across his forehead. They were the only ones in the facility. No one else was supposed to be there. Slowly, he lifted his flashlight and pointed it down the corridor, but the beam barely penetrated the darkness, swallowed up by the inky black. "Stay here," he ordered, though his own voice betrayed a tremor. "I'm going to check it out." Ingrid grabbed his arm, her grip tight. "Don't. We need to be together in this. If there's something down there, we should all go." Dr. Warren hesitated, but then nodded. They moved together, their footsteps tentative, echoing through the still air. The corridor seemed to stretch on endlessly, the darkness pressing in on all sides, and as they moved deeper, the air grew colder, the faint metallic odor stronger, more pungent. The rhythmic tapping continued, a steady hypnotic beat that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. They reached a junction where the corridor split into two paths, each disappearing into the shadows. The tapping had stopped, but the silence that followed was somehow worse, a heavy, suffocating stillness that made Dr. Warren's heart pound in his chest. Then, without warning, the lights flickered, and for a split second he thought he saw something move at the edge of his vision. A flash of dark, sinewy limbs slithering across the wall before vanishing into the shadows. He jerked his flashlight toward the spot, but there was nothing there. "Did you see that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. Ingrid nodded, her face pale. "We need to go back, Alec. This place isn't safe." "We can't," he said, though the words felt hollow. "We need to know what's here." Over the next few days, the tension among the team escalated. They continued their exploration, cataloging the alien technology they found, but each discovery brought more questions than answers. The base was a maze, its passages winding deeper and deeper, and it was becoming clear that the complex was far larger than they had initially thought. And yet, no matter how far they ventured, they always seemed to end up back at the central chamber, as if the facility were guiding them, subtly manipulating their paths. The hallucinations began shortly after. Harris was the first to notice them. He came stumbling into the chamber one night, his eyes wide and frantic, mumbling incoherently about shadows that moved when there was no light, about whispers that echoed through the walls. Dr. Warren tried to calm him, but as the days passed, the others began to experience the same thing. Shapes flickering at the corner of their vision, voices murmuring in a language they couldn't understand, twisting and slipping away whenever they tried to focus. One night, Dr. Warren found himself unable to sleep. He lay in his bunk, staring up at the dark metal ceiling, listening to the faint, rhythmic hum of the alien device. It was comforting, almost, a steady beat that seemed to echo in time with his own pulse. But then, slowly, the rhythm began to change, shifting into a strange, irregular pattern, like a coded message. He strained to hear, to understand, and for a moment he thought he could make out words, fragments of phrases that seemed to claw at the edges of his mind. "We see you. We know you. You are ours." The words sent a chill down his spine. He bolted upright, gasping, his heart hammering in his chest. For a moment he was certain there was something in the room with him, a dark shape crouched at the foot of his bed, but when he turned on the light there was nothing there, just the empty, cold air and the echo of his own breath. The following day, Dr. Warren gathered the team in the central chamber. He could see the fear etched on their faces, the exhaustion in their eyes. Ingrid was particularly pale, her hands shaking as she gripped her clipboard. They had all felt it, the creeping dread, the sense of being watched, of something lurking just out of sight. "We need to find out what's causing this," Dr. Warren said, trying to keep his voice steady. "There's something in this facility that's affecting us. We've all seen things, heard things, and it's getting worse." Harris shook his head. "It's not just this place, Doctor. Warren, it's everything. I had a dream last night. I was back home, but it wasn't really home. Everything was twisted, wrong. My family. They weren't my family, they were..." He trailed off, his voice choked with emotion. "I don't want to be here anymore." "We can't leave, not yet," Dr. Warren said. We're too close to understanding what this place is, what it was built for. If we can figure that out, maybe we can stop whatever's happening. Or maybe we're the reason it's happening, Ingrid said quietly. Maybe we woke it up. As they delved deeper into the facility, the hallucinations grew more vivid, more intense. Dr. Warren began to see things that couldn't be real, impossible, alien landscapes stretching out before him, vast, darkened skies filled with strange, shifting constellations. He would see them in flashes whenever he closed his eyes, and he could feel the pull of them, as if the facility was dragging his mind through space and time, showing him things that no human was meant to see. He spent hours in the control room, poring over the alien inscriptions, trying to make sense of them. The symbols danced across the screens, twisting and shifting, and slowly he began to piece together a history, a story of an ancient civilization, the Vhy'karesh, who had built this place. They were explorers, but they had found something they could not control, something they had tried to imprison within the facility. The more he read, the more he felt a growing sense of dread. The Vhy'karesh hadn't just been explorers, they had been conquerors, seeking to harness the power of the entity they had found. But they had failed, and in their failure they had sealed themselves away, hoping to prevent the entity from ever escaping. "We're not just explorers," Dr. Warren said, his voice barely audible as he spoke to himself. "We're prisoners, and we don't even know it." Ingrid found him hours later, slumped over the console, his eyes bloodshot and hollow. "Alec, you need to stop this," she said, her voice shaking. "You're scaring everyone. We need to leave. Whatever's down here, it's not meant for us." But Dr. Warren didn't hear her. He was staring at the screen, his eyes wide, unblinking, as the symbols shifted and twisted, forming a single coherent phrase that burned itself into his mind. "It has waited for eons, and now it is awake." The lights flickered, and for a moment, the room was plunged into darkness. When they came back on, Ingrid saw Dr. Warren's face and the look in his eyes made her stomach twist with fear. It wasn't just terror she saw there. It was understanding, a terrible, profound understanding that went beyond anything they had discovered. "It's awake," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "And it's not going to let us leave." The central chamber had become a tomb of silence, a place where time seemed to stretch and bend, warping into a never-ending night. The alien device at the center continued its rhythmic pulsing, a steady, cold heartbeat that resonated through the walls, through the floors, and deep into the minds of the few remaining members of the expedition. The base had gone eerily quiet, a stillness that felt like the pause before a storm, a momentary calm before everything shattered. Dr. Alec Warren stood in the center of the room, staring at the dark metal surface of the device. It had become an obsession, a fixation that gnawed at the edges of his sanity. The longer he looked at it, the more he felt as though he were falling, being pulled into something vast and incomprehensible. He knew he should be afraid, but instead he felt a strange sense of calm, as though he were on the verge of understanding something that transcended human thought. The hum grew louder, vibrating through his skull, and for a brief, terrifying moment, he thought he could feel it resonating within his own heartbeat, syncing perfectly with the rhythm of his pulse. It was as if the machine were inside him, or he was inside it, the two becoming indistinguishable. The others had started to avoid him, their faces pale and eyes hollow with fear. Harris had disappeared 2 days ago, leaving behind only a trail of muddy footprints that led down a darkened corridor and simply stopped, as if he had been swallowed by the darkness. No one spoke of it, but they all felt it. The unspoken, terrifying certainty that they were being hunted, that something was moving through the base, watching them, waiting. Ingrid found Dr. Warren slumped over one of the alien consoles, his fingers running absent-mindedly over the strange, fluid-like symbols that danced across the screen. She had dark circles under her eyes, her face gaunt and drawn. They were all running on fumes, their nerves stretched thin, and the fear was eating away at them, piece by piece. "Alec, we need to talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something's happening to this place. We keep losing people, and I don't think they're coming back." Dr. Warren didn't look up. "I know," he said, his voice distant, hollow. "It's awake, Ingrid. We woke it up." "What are you talking about?" she snapped, a note of panic creeping into her voice. "What did we wake up?" He turned to her then, and the look in his eyes sent a chill down her spine. There was a madness there, but beneath it, there was something worse, an understanding, a terrible, knowing calm. "It was never asleep," he said softly. "It's been waiting, dreaming. This place, it's a prison, but it's also a temple. The Vhy'karesh built it to contain something, to keep it hidden, but they couldn't destroy it. And now, after all this time, it's found a way to reach out. It's been calling to us, bringing us here, piece by piece." Ingrid recoiled, horror dawning on her face. "No, that's impossible. We came here because of the anomalies, the magnetic fields." "The anomalies were a lure," he interrupted, his voice rising. "A signal, a beacon. It's been drawing us in, manipulating us. Everything we've done, every decision we've made, was guided by it. Can't you see? We were never in control." She felt the ground sway beneath her feet, the words sinking in like a cold, heavy weight. The idea was absurd, impossible, but in her heart she knew he was right. She had felt it too, that strange compulsion, that sense of being pulled towards something unseen. They had thought they were explorers, but they were puppets, following strings they couldn't see. "We have to get out of here," she said, her voice shaking. "We have to leave before it's too late." "It's already too late," Dr. Warren said, almost absently. "We're inside its mind now, and it's inside ours." The following hours were a blur of panic and confusion. Ingrid tried to rally the remaining team members, but the base had become a maze, the corridors twisting and changing, leading them in circles. They stumbled through the darkened passages, their flashlights flickering, casting long, distorted shadows on the walls. It was as though the facility itself were shifting, reshaping around them, blocking their escape. The air grew heavier, thick with a sense of foreboding. Strange, metallic sounds echoed through the hallways, a distant, rhythmic clanging that seemed to come from every direction. The base felt alive, its walls pulsing with a slow, rhythmic beat, like the breathing of a giant, unseen creature. And somewhere, deep below, they could hear it, something stirring, something vast and terrible, waking from a long, dreamless slumber. They regrouped in the central chamber, their faces pale, eyes darting nervously to the darkened corridors that stretched out around them. The alien device at the center of the room pulsed faster now, the light within it flickering like a dying star. "It's changing," said one of the scientists, his voice barely a whisper. "The whole base, it's changing. We have to shut it down." Dr. Warren stood in front of the device, staring into the pulsing light. "You can't shut it down," he said. "It's not a machine. It's a gateway." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Ingrid stepped forward, her voice tight with fear. "A gateway to what?" Dr. Warren looked at her, and for a moment he seemed to struggle with the words, as if they were too terrible to speak. "To whatever the Vhy'karesh found," he said finally. "To something older than time, older than the universe itself. They thought they could contain it, but they only trapped themselves." He reached out, his hand hovering over the console, and Ingrid lunged forward, grabbing his arm. "Alec, stop! We don't know what we're dealing with." But he shook her off, his eyes fixed on the device. "I have to know," he whispered. "I have to see it." The lights flickered, and for a moment everything went dark. The hum of the device grew louder, reverberating through the walls, through their bones, a low, guttural sound that felt like it was pulling them apart, piece by piece. And then, with a sudden, violent jolt, the device came to life, the pulse quickening, the light within it blazing bright and cold. The chamber was flooded with light, blinding, searing, and for a moment Dr. Warren could see everything. The walls of the base stretching out into infinity, the dark, twisting tunnels spiraling down into the earth, and at the center a vast, writhing mass, its form shifting and undulating like a serpent made of shadows. He heard it then, a voice that echoed through the chamber, deep and resonant, speaking in a language he couldn't understand, but which resonated within his mind as if he had always known it, as if it had been whispering to him all along. "I am the void," it said, "the endless, the eternal. I have no beginning and no end. I was here before your world was born, and I will be here long after it is dust. You have awakened me, and now you are mine." Dr. Warren felt his mind unraveling, his thoughts slipping away, dissolving into the darkness. He tried to speak, but no words came, only a silent, desperate scream that echoed in his mind. The light flickered and he could see them, figures moving through the dark, their eyes black and empty, their bodies twisted, deformed, as if reshaped by some terrible unseen force. Ingrid watched in horror as the device began to emit a low, guttural rumble, the sound growing louder, deeper, until it felt like the entire base was shaking. The walls began to warp, twisting and bending, and she realized with a sickening dread that the base was collapsing, the structure folding in on itself, as if being consumed by the entity that had been trapped within it. "We have to get out," she screamed, but the others were frozen, their eyes wide, mouths open in silent horror, as they stared at the writhing, shifting shadows that filled the chamber. The ground buckled beneath their feet, and Dr. Warren stumbled, falling to his knees. The light from the device flared one last time, blinding, searing, and he felt a cold, dark presence wrap around him, pulling him into the void, into a place where time had no meaning, where there was only endless, suffocating darkness. "You are nothing," the voice whispered as the world dissolved around him. "You are a fragment, a flicker of light in the abyss, and I am the abyss." And then, with a final, deafening roar, the base collapsed, the metal walls crumpling, the corridors twisting and breaking, as the entity surged forward, ripping through the fabric of reality, tearing open a rift that stretched out into the infinite void beyond. When the dust settled, there was nothing left but silence. The base was gone, swallowed by the ice, and the entity had vanished, leaving behind only an empty, G-aping wound in the earth. Above, the Antarctic wind howled, carrying with it the echoes of a whisper, a faint rhythmic hum that lingered just at the edge of hearing. Far beneath the ice, something stirred, something vast and dark, a presence that had been waiting, dreaming for countless millennia. It had awoken, and it was hungry, and now it would not be denied. And somewhere, in the endless dark expanse, Dr. Warren drifted, his mind a shattered hollow shell, lost in the vastness, forever falling into the abyss. As the whispers grew louder, a chorus of voices echoing through the void. We see you. We know you. You are ours. The air was heavy, thick with an oppressive, suffocating silence. Darkness had swallowed the base, seeping into every corner, every crevice, stretching like a living, breathing thing. The faint, rhythmic hum that had once been a background whisper had now become a deafening roar, a relentless, pulsing beat that reverberated through the walls, through their bones, like the drumbeat of some ancient, unfathomable heart. Ingrid stumbled through the twisted, crumbling corridors, her flashlight flickering, casting frantic, jagged beams of light that barely cut through the gloom. She was alone now, her breath ragged, eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. She had lost track of how many hours had passed since everything had gone wrong, since Dr. Warren had activated the device and everything had started to unravel. The others were gone, swallowed by the darkness, their last screams still echoing in her ears. The base was falling apart around her, the metal walls groaning and twisting, like the bones of some great beast writhing in agony. But Ingrid kept moving, her mind clinging to a single desperate thought. There had to be a way out. There had to be a way to escape this nightmare. She stumbled into the central chamber where it had all begun, where the alien device still stood, pulsing with a cold, dark light. The room was a chaotic mess of debris, cables, and shattered equipment, but the device was untouched, pristine, as if it were the only thing in the room that truly existed. Its light flickered, a rhythmic, hypnotic beat, and she felt it pulling at her, drawing her closer. For a moment she stood there, staring at it, her mind numb with terror. She could see the alien symbols shifting across its surface, flowing like liquid, forming patterns that twisted and looped, stretching out into infinity. They were speaking to her, whispering in a language she couldn't understand, but which resonated deep within her, echoing in the darkest corners of her mind. "It's awake," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's here." The realization washed over her like a cold wave, chilling her to the bone. She had known it deep down, even before Dr. Warren had said the words, but now it was undeniable. The entity that the Vhy'karesh had imprisoned, the being they had tried to contain, was no longer dormant. It had been watching, waiting, and now it was free. And she understood with a sickening clarity that everything they had done, everything they had discovered, had only been part of its plan. The hum grew louder, a deafening, throbbing roar, and she felt the ground shudder beneath her feet. The walls of the chamber began to twist and warp, the metal bending and stretching as if some unseen force were tearing the base apart, piece by piece. She staggered back, her heart pounding, as the light from the device flared, blindingly bright, and she heard it. The voice, deep and resonant, echoing through the room, speaking in a language that was not made for human ears, but which she understood nonetheless. "I am the beginning and the end. I am the void, the eternal, the unending. You have seen my prison, and now you shall see my kingdom." Ingrid fell to her knees, her hands clamped over her ears, but the voice was inside her head, tearing through her thoughts, twisting her memories, her fears, her very sense of self. She could see it then, not with her eyes, but with something deeper, something more primal. It was a vast, endless darkness, stretching out into eternity, filled with countless, shifting shapes, writhing and coiling, like a sea of shadows. The entity had no form, no shape that she could comprehend. It was everything and nothing, a mass of writhing black tendrils that twisted and merged, stretching out into the void, blotting out the light. And at its center she could see eyes, countless eyes, staring at her, through her, as if they had always been watching, as if they had always known her deepest fears, her darkest thoughts. She tried to scream, but no sound came out. The darkness pressed down on her, suffocating, crushing, and she felt herself falling, spiraling down into the abyss as the entity's voice whispered, a cold, mocking echo. "You thought you could escape. You thought you could resist. But you were always mine. From the moment you stepped into my domain, you belonged to me." The chamber was collapsing around her, the walls crumbling, the ceiling buckling, but the device remained untouched, its light pulsing faster, more erratic, as if it were struggling to contain the force within it. Ingrid could see it now, the truth that had been hidden from them, the truth that Dr. Warren had glimpsed before he had been consumed. The Vhy'karesh had not built the base to contain the entity. They had built it to worship it, to offer it sacrifices, to feed it, to keep it alive. They had believed that by serving it they could harness its power, but they had been fools. They had only succeeded in trapping themselves, in dooming themselves to an eternity of torment, and now humanity had done the same. She crawled forward, her hands shaking, her vision blurred, but she forced herself to move. She had to stop it. She had to find a way to shut it down, to seal the device, to send the entity back into the void. But as she reached out, her fingers barely brushing the smooth, dark surface, the light flared again, and she was thrown back, a wave of force slamming into her, knocking the air from her lungs. The ground split open beneath her, a jagged, gaping chasm, and she felt herself slipping, sliding toward the edge. She clawed at the metal floor, her nails scraping, but the darkness was pulling her down, dragging her toward the abyss, and she knew with a terrible, sickening certainty that there was no escape. "You are nothing," the voice whispered as the light dimmed, as the walls crumbled, as the base collapsed around her. "You are a flicker of light, a fleeting moment in the endless night, and I am the night. I am the end of all things." The ground gave way and she fell, tumbling into the darkness, into the void, her mind shattering, her thoughts unraveling as the entity's voice echoed, louder, deeper, a chorus of whispers that filled the abyss. Far above, on the surface, the storm raged, the wind howling across the frozen wasteland, carrying with it the faint, rhythmic hum that had been growing louder, stronger, as the hours passed. The last of the monitoring equipment, left abandoned at the edge of the drilling site, blinked red, the signals it had been sending out now lost, buried beneath the roar of the storm. The ground trembled, a deep, resonant rumble, and then, with a sudden, violent jolt, the ice split open, a jagged crack tearing across the landscape, stretching out for miles, as if the earth itself were breaking apart. And from the depths of the chasm, from the dark, gaping wound in the earth, a dark mist began to rise, swirling, coiling, stretching out toward the sky. The light was gone now, swallowed by the darkness, and in its place there was only the mist, a thick, impenetrable fog that spread out across the ice, creeping, crawling like tendrils of smoke. And within the mist, if one listened closely, they could hear it. The faint, rhythmic hum, the pulse of a heart that had been silent for millennia, now beating once more. "We see you," the voice whispered, carried on the wind, barely audible, but there, persistent, unrelenting. "We know you. You are ours." As the mist spread, it swallowed everything it touched, the snow, the ice, the remnants of the base, until there was nothing left but the endless swirling dark. And somewhere, deep within the void, 1,000 eyes opened, blinking, staring, as the entity stirred, as it reached out, stretching its tendrils across the vast, endless expanse, hungry, insatiable. It had waited for eons, and now it was free. Free to spread, free to consume, free to devour the light, the stars, the very fabric of reality itself. And there would be no escape, no salvation, no end to the nightmare that had begun. As the storm raged on, as the mist continued to spread, the last remnants of the monitoring equipment flickered, a single garbled transmission broadcasting out into the dark, empty sky. A final, desperate warning, a cry that would go unheard, lost in the void. It's awake, and it's coming. And then, with a final, shuddering pulse, the signal died, and there was only silence. A deep, suffocating silence as the darkness swallowed everything, as the last flicker of light was snuffed out, leaving only the void, endless, eternal, and unending. The entity had awoken, and it would not be denied.